Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our digital Q&A session today with Jake Clark. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I recognise the connection to land, sea and skies and would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend those respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples that are attending here today. My name is Tegan Duke, and I am a space communicator at the Australian Space Discovery Centre, and today I'm assisted behind the scenes by Bella. If you have any questions today for Jake during our chat, please submit them through the Q&A function on this meeting, or ask your teacher to send them through, and at the end of our discussion, I will read out some of those questions to Jake for you. One last piece of housekeeping. Our session today will finish at 2:45 p.m. Australian Central Standard Time, but we invite you to stop into the Discovery Centre if you'd like to learn more, or you can contact us through the details on our website. So I'd like to introduce Jake to you and let him introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Jake Clark and I am joining you all from Ngunnawal country, and I would also like to pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people and pay respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any First Nations people attending today. I think especially with astronomy, there's such a deep connection that First Nations people have with the land, sea and skies, and that most of the European aristocrats that we know and think of astronomy weren't the first observers of astronomy, and it's actually the oldest continuing culture that we have here in Australia that have that knowledge and have had that knowledge for thousands and thousands of years. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about my journey from where I've come from to where I am now. And I am originally from Adelaide, so this is sort of a dream come true for me as a little kid from Salisbury, and dreaming of one day having an Australian space agency. And now the fact that's come sort of full circle, and I can show my journey to the Australian Space Agency is so freaking cool. And so I went through high school. Unfortunately, failed year 12, had to repeat year 12. Then went and did a Bachelor of Space Science and Astrophysics at Adelaide. And then whilst I was at the University of Adelaide, I joined Radio Adelaide, and I had my own radio show, which has now been going on for 12 years, which is absolutely incredible. And so that was the sort of start of my communications journey, which has sort of been spearheaded to now being wrapped up into my two loves of talking about what I do and then also doing what I'm doing. So that's sort of been the start of my journey in terms of science communication, and then also in parallel with that, also doing a degree in astrophysics and understanding the cosmos and the universe around us, and bringing those two loves together. So in the next slide before I go, so you can see that, behind the desk, they're doing a whole bunch of radio interviews with a whole bunch of different bands, which is most of them are local, which is great. And then if we continue on to the next slide, then you have, after I finished up with my honours at the University of Adelaide in atmospheric physics, so I was looking at data from Antarctica and trying to determine what types of clouds form in the stratosphere. So that's a layer above the troposphere, and it's so cold that nitrogen and sulfuric acid can condense down to form clouds, which is probably sub-ideal for anyone involved if you're around when it precipitates. But also these clouds naturally deplete ozone, so it was really interesting to better understand the natural ozone cycle down in Antarctica. And then I had a year off, and I'm like, I don't want to study ever again. And I was working in pubs and clubs, trying to make ends meet. And then I saw an ad on Facebook, of all things, to run away and join the circus. And I have size 15 feet, so I thought, perfect, that fits me to a T. And so I got to do my master's with Questacon and the Australian National University based here in Canberra, and I got to travel around Australia presenting engaging science shows to both high schoolers and primary schoolers. As you can see down in the bottom left hand corner, I'm sending a little dragon to space. And then up in the top left hand corner, after I finished my master's, I ended up getting a job at Questacon as a part of the Maker project with the Ian Potter Foundation. And so again, doing incursions and doing a whole bunch of delivery both in Canberra and then across Australia to get more kids engaged and have a fond love of science. But then after that, I got back into the horse and I started my PhD up at the University of Southern Queensland. And so I've always had a love of planets and thinking about some of the most fundamental questions known to us of, are we alone? And so I was able and really lucky to do a PhD up at the University of Southern Queensland, where I was able to detect and characterize planets beyond our solar system called exoplanets. So on the next slide, you'll see the Minerva Australis array. And so you can see the domes in the back, the sort of white space helmets. So they sort of are little clams and they open up and you've got the telescopes in there, and we'll see one in a second. And so that's just based outside of Toowoomba. Toowoomba is about 2 hours west of Brisbane. And it is the only observatory in the entire Southern Hemisphere dedicated to NASA's planet finding mission called TESS. Now, TESS is the Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite mission, and it's a little satellite orbiting around Earth, and it's scouring the entire night sky for planets. And so I was lucky enough to be able to use this telescope and these telescopes, I should say, with a whole other range of telescopes, both here in Australia and across the world, to find and characterize these alien worlds. And so in the next slide, you'll see I've been able to before I even say that, this is such a gorgeous image of the Minerva Australis array opened up during the nighttime. You can see the Milky Way. Just the next one there, gang. And we can see the Milky Way sprawled across, and super fortunate to live out in regional Queensland, where this is sort of a monthly occurrence, which is absolutely gorgeous. And you can even see right up the top there a bit of Sagittarius there as well. And so in the next slide, my PhD was about 4 and a bit hours. Sorry, 4 and a bit hours. I wish 4.5 years. And so this is me operating the largest telescope in Australia, the Anglo-Australian telescope, and I'm using an instrument called Veloce. And so Veloce grabs the starlight, splits it up from red to blue, and then we can actually see some markers of the planets in the spectrum. And I can talk a little bit about how we do that a bit later on. And you can actually see that spectrum there's 4 monitors there. In the third one, and you can see these little stripes, and then you can see on I think it's the 4th one there, those black lines sort of going across that spectrum, and those are the little lines that we're looking for and how they move backwards and forwards if there's a planet around them. So that was really, really cool. And so I got to use that telescope and then also share and communicate what I was doing here in Australia and then also across America as well. So during my PhD, I was able to go to the States and present my work to various organizations. And so I got to go to the Southwest Research Institute, which I'll talk about in a sec, the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is where the mission control rooms are for the James Webb Space Telescope and the Hubble Space Telescope. And so on the top left, you can see me behind Minerva, and we'll go clockwise. So there's me at the front of the mission control room for James Webb. On the right, and then going around at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore. And then down in the bottom right, I was very, very fortunate. So I guess my love of Southwest Research Conference in Adelaide a few years ago and meet him in person, which was an absolute, as you saw before, I've been able to meet some amazing artists and musicians, and I think I was more nervous about meeting Andy than I was any of those musicians. And then the last picture is me at the Southwest Research Institute, which is where I did my Fulbright, which I can talk about in a sec. And then as doing all that sort of research, I'm also, as you can tell, love talking, can talk with a mouth full of marbles underwater, and so did a whole bunch of outreach with my PhD as well. So got to go to Charleville out in the regional Queensland, got to go to Tasmania, do radio interviews, even got to design an award-winning float in Toowoomba's Flower Festival, which was absolutely amazing. And yeah, I love communicating science just as much as doing it. And then the next slide is me doing my Fulbright. Not me actually doing any work, as you can tell. But traveling around America, and then so what I was doing with my Fulbright is using machine learning to actually work out what types of planets we could see around different types of stars. So a bit like Netflix, if you're someone who really likes Western movies, you will get suggested Westerns instead of rom-coms or whatever. And so it's a very sort of similar style in terms of utilizing scientific data for that. And so I got to travel around and present my work as well. And so the telescope on the left is from the Lowell Observatory, and that is the telescope that discovered Pluto. And it was Pluto Day only a couple of days ago, which is really, really cool. And you can see me trying to find my family in Roswell, and then below you can see me behind a Saturn V and with my fiance at the mission control room at the Apollo missions in the Houston Space Center. And then I got to do a couple of talks around America, and that included Williamstown University up in Massachusetts, which is where I am in the bottom right. And then I think I only have one more, sorry. Oh, and then I graduated, yeah. And so it's not every time you graduate and you get to take a picture with Australian Test cricket captain, but here you are, Mr. Healy. And then so he's got some very bright daughters. One actually graduated with a PhD in psychology that day. And yeah, so I've been able to graduate, and then after graduation, I've been working back at Questacon, utilizing my background in data science to better understand how we can create effective and engaging science and STEM outreach and education experiences to actually change culture in schools and other informal learning environments, which is really, really cool. And I got recognized for the awesome work that I've been doing with the inaugural Australian Public Service Data Awards. And so I got the Early Career Data Scientist Award in the bottom right, and then sort of as momentum from that, I was very, very fortunate to be awarded the Young Alumni of the Year from the University of Southern Queensland last year. So that's me with the Vice Chancellor on the left, and then my family and my huge supporters up at USQ up the top right, and then the bottom right is me with my local PM, Dr. Andrew Lee, who is a big advocate actually for creating change within government, and I can talk a little bit about that later on. So yeah, that's my journey in a nutshell, in a quick and dirty way. And then we can got some slides a bit later on to talk about some of the cool stuff I've been able to do as well.
Awesome.
That's me.
Thank you for that intro. Could you tell us a little bit about what a day looks like as a data scientist and science communicator working at Questacon?
It is so, as someone who, they call spicy brains. Well, I call it spicy brains. So for me, it really tickles my passion in terms of data science, in terms of social science, in terms of I'm someone who wants to work in a sort of a values-driven workplace. And so at Questacon, where we are trying to create change in terms of people's attitudes and behaviors around STEM, it's really, really great for yourself, Tegan, working at the Australian Space Discovery Centre. You're on the coalface of it and you're interacting with these people and you're thinking, okay, well, is what I'm doing, whether it's a workshop or whether it's a show or a Q&A like this, are we actually making a difference in terms of people's attitudes and behaviours or dispositions around science and technology? And so I get the amazing job of every day trying to piece together all of Questacon's work. So Questacon is the National Science and Technology Centre based in Canberra. It is 8 stories of just interactive scientific goodness where you can just become a kid again. And I remember the first time I came to Questacon when I was about 25 and was like, where has this been my entire life? And so we have this incredible center here, but then as you saw with my master's doing the science circus, is that we get to showcase that all across Australia, whether it's workshops for high school students or science shows for primary school students, or we also teach the teachers, so doing professional learning for educators, or one of my favorite programs is called STEM Futures, where we're actually going into the schools and have a 6-month-long program to work with not only the teachers but also the STEM coordinators, the principals, to actually better embed a positive STEM culture in those schools and also with other organizations across Australia. So my job is literally to piece all those pieces together and see, are we actually making a change? And so it could be something like a data request of, okay, well, how many people have we seen in South Australia in the last couple of months? Or it could be something as writing a report on how we've been able to change teachers' confidence in delivering engineering in the classrooms, or as I mentioned, in terms of creating that culture. So every day is very, very different and it keeps you busy and on your toes for sure.
Awesome. What are some of the skills that you would say are important for both a data scientist role and that communications role?
Very good question. I think it's understanding, if you're looking at the sort of Venn diagram of them both, there's actually a lot of overlap. And I think knowing your audience is such a big factor, whether it's you're looking at grabbing some data, bringing it together, analyzing it to then give back to either, a funding body, or it could be for a scientific journal, or it could be for a peer. You need to understand, well, what's important to them. Or if you're doing science communication, you have to understand, well, if you want to engage kids from a low SES background, what are their barriers? Like, what are they interested in, and what can you curate that actually brings them along in that journey? And so it's sort of two sides of the same coin on that front. So I think communicating and communication is such a big skill to have. I also think that just problem solving, no matter what job or area you're going to go to, or you could be working at Woolies, or you can be trying to operate the ISS, or be a peacekeeper in the UN, or even in your own everyday life. You're always going to run into problems, and so it's a matter of being able to work out what are some of the best ways to solve these problems, and what's going to be of maximum benefit to everyone in those parties. So yeah, I think like being able to problem solve is such a big asset. And then also, if you're touring around and you've forgotten something, like I did as a goose one day, I forgot like half my props as I was touring around Australia, and I was on the truck, and I'm like, what on earth am I going to do? So again, like, I guess the skills of thinking on your feet are also good, and nothing ever goes to plan. And I think like what you've seen in the last 15 minutes or so, in the first 15 or 20 minutes or so, was a real linear progression of how life has gone, but that is not the case. And there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of changing directions or a lot of things not going your way. And so I think it's a matter of thinking on your feet, and then also how you sort of face challenges and vertices, and those, again, like how you solve problems is, I think, a testament to you and others in terms of how you go around solving those things. But I guess, in terms of hardcore skills, in data, knowing how to code is great, and it doesn't matter what coding language, because most coding languages are very similar, whether you're learning R or Python, which is sort of the programming languages that I use, or you can go real old school and use Fortran, which is still used by some. I don't know why people still use that language. Anyways, yeah, so if you know how to code in one language, you're pretty good in terms of coding for others. And I think in terms of science communication, if you've ever wanted to do it, now's a better time to start than any. Like, chat to your mates about some sort of scientific concept that you love and enjoy, or try and find opportunities out there, especially with National Science Week that only just happened last week, 2 weeks ago, and the opportunities that can present to you in terms of an avenue to talk about your science, other people's science, is really, really cool. So yeah, sorry. Also, my brain is like tangents upon tangents.
No,
so
that
I
was
apologize.
Awesome. Maybe we can chat a little bit about your journey. What got you into doing that astrophysics degree? Did you have role models? Were you interested from an early age?
Yeah, really good question. So as I mentioned, I born and bred from Salisbury and the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And to give you some sort of perspective on that for people watching, you're in the sort of bottom 10 to 20% of socioeconomic status in Australia. You're also looking at unemployment, high unemployment rates. No one in my direct family that I knew of even finished high school, let alone went to uni. And so there was a lot of barriers there in terms of preparing yourself to going on, or, as someone growing up, I just thought that you just become a factory worker. You just work at a factory, or you work at a supermarket, or and that was sort of the limitations of what you can do. And that's not to say that if people are working in that, that's beneath them or anything like that. Like, if that's what you want to do, then that's sick. But I think there's also being able for everyone to find what they're good at and how they can contribute to society and what possibilities are out there is really, really important. And Corey Tutt, who is the CEO of Deadly Science, I think says it really well in terms of you can't be what you can't see. And when I was a kid, I was really into space and loved the planets, would read all the books. And again, like, my parents didn't finish high school, but I think what is really important, and especially anecdotally, and then also in the evidence that I see with the literature that I read in terms of my own work now, is that having an important embedded ecosystem around an individual that supports and nurtures their learning is so important. And the people who are nearest to them, their nearest influences, such as their parents, are huge role models for that. So I was very, very lucky in terms of my parents sort of buying books around space, or would go down to the state library and borrow some books, or help out create a little diorama of the solar system, or stuff like that. So very, very important in that aspect. And then when I was in high school, I wanted to go down the route of join the Air Force and become a pilot. And then I realized that I find it challenging to accept orders without a reason. And so I'm like, all right, well, that's going to be problematic if I want to go down that route. And it wasn't until the last day of choosing a university degree in year 13, where I was like, oh well, I remember as a kid I like space, I love physics, so I just type in space physics and found the degree found the degree at University of Adelaide, and literally that was it. So I'm like, yep, all right, let's do it, and if anything comes of that, let's see what happens. So I think I found that form only a couple of years ago in terms of my other possible uni pathways, and it's just wild to think where I would be if that didn't happen.
Yeah, I've got some audience questions. Somebody has asked, they'd love to know what your proudest achievement to date is, and what do you think a key driver to achieving that was?
Man,
big question, a hard question.
That's such a big question. I think one of the coolest things and proudest things that I'm a part of here at Questacon, and it would be here, I mean, like, yes, being able to discover some really cool planets or, work in astrophysics, but we now have a measure at Questacon where we need to, with all the events that we do outside of Canberra and outside of Australia, half of those need to be to low SES communities, whether it's schools, if we're going into a classroom, or whether it's if we have a pop-up science center that has to go to a low SES community. And then 60% of those events need to go to regional or remote Australia as well on top of that. And I've been a big driver to create that change and be able to document and collect the data that we need to prove that we are doing that. And one, that's a testament to the people on the ground and the booking teams and all the rest of it to make that happen. But I think to be able to show that that is possible and we can reach underserved audiences like that, and with the creation of a community of practice, which is essentially a group of all these amazing people, including the Australian Space Discovery Centre, including CSIRO, SciTech, which is a science centre over in Perth, and being able to create this community together to be able to answer these big fundamental questions of how we create change, and particularly how we can create change in underserved communities, I think is one of my favorite achievements. And so I think in terms of those sort of skills, again, it's a matter of getting. Oh my goodness! Hang on, give me 1 second. I'm trying to articulate this. I think trying to find allies who can see what you're trying to achieve, particularly those around you and people who are above you, because if you don't have that support from above you, it's going to be really, really hard to create that change. And so it's been great to sort of have champions around me here that will do that. I think also everyone wants to see people succeed and to create opportunities for all Australians, and that's a big driver here at Questacon. So I think it's a matter of getting people on board, communicating its importance,
it's awesome,
and try and find champions.
Yeah, I was going to say it's awesome that you get to sort of be that champion and show what an awesome and fulfilling career you can have no matter what your background is, and being a testament to that. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about, you mentioned your Fulbright scholarship and your PhD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so something completely different. So my PhD was on, as I mentioned, finding and characterizing exoplanets or planets beyond the solar system. And one of the big things that I was able to do in my PhD is that there is a survey here in Australia called GALAR. So astronomers love to call things after Australian native animals. So we have magpie, there's funnel web, there's which I was working on, which was GALAR, which is the Galactic Archaeology Survey, with Hermes. And so basically what that is that we're looking at the entire southern hemisphere, collecting the starlight of over, I think, 700,000 stars so far to better understand how the galaxy began and evolved to its current state. And you can do that by looking at the starlight and looking at the composition of those stars, both physically and chemically. And what was cool is that, like, in that sort of field, people were sort of looking at it from a sort of galactic context. And then I saw all this data. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like this could be so useful to the planet community and the exoplanet community. And so what I was able to do is to grab some of that information, look at that point, TESS was just about to launch the planet finding satellite, which I was talking about before. And so I was able to bring together, look at the stars that TESS was observing, and then look at the stars that Galar has been observing. Because if we want to find a planet like ours, we need to fundamentally know the stars, we need to fundamentally understand the physical properties and chemical properties of the host star. Because when we discover planets, whether it's through the transit technique, where we're looking at a dip in the starlight, or we're looking at the wobble, those fundamental properties of the mass of the planet and the size of the planet come from those stars. So if there's any error, or if we think that the star's this big, and it's actually this big, then that is a huge effect on what we think the actual planet will be. And then that has an effect on what the density could be. And if we want to actually determine if anything is habitable, understanding the star is like key. Like, can't stress that enough. And so that's what I was working on, was a whole massive catalog called the TESS Galar catalog. And so there's 50,000 stars there, which were being observed by TESS, and was also looking at, if we were to find rocky planets around those stars, what would they likely be comprised of? Would they be like planets in our solar system? Would they not? And it turns out about half of them will be like the rocky planets that we find in our solar system, and the other half are going to be like unlike anything we see, which is wild, so wild. So that's the sort of stuff that I was working on.
Awesome. I have another question from the audience, and if anyone else in the audience wants to add more questions, add them into the Q&A function. This one says, what is the next big thing that you'd like to work on?
Great question. I'm still trying to work that
another hard question.
These are all great. These are all great, challenging questions. What I would like to do is that I found out, so Questacon is actually part of the Australian government, the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, just as this Australian Space Agency is. And what I've discovered in the last few years whilst working at Questacon is that if you want to create some really, really big change, then you have to create what's known as a policy, or what governments are focusing in on. And so that's something that I've been contemplating in the last few months, is how to get into that policy space and how to create meaningful change so that we can get more resources out there to underrepresented communities, so we can get more STEM initiatives out there. Or what I would like to walk away from of this little blip on our blue marble is have every Australian reach their full potential and be able to have equal opportunities across, whether you are in a remote community in Northern Territory, or if you're in the back of Western Sydney, or the northern beaches of Sydney, or anywhere, you get the same opportunities and access to become whoever you want to be and be the greatest potential. live that live your fullest potential. And I think that's where I want to go. Yeah, sorry. I'm getting really nervous and anxious, so I'm sorry that I'm stumbling over my words.
But no, you're doing great. This is an awkward online session, but you're doing awesome. Do you have any advice for someone who might want to join the space industry?
Yeah, good question. I think the space industry has, and I guess it depends upon what part of the space industry they want to get into, whether it's, and what's been great in the last like 10 to 15 years is the space industry here in Australia has absolutely exploded. And so if you want to get into satellites, you can. If you want to get into monitoring near Earth asteroids as they zip past and work out what materials they are so you could potentially mine them in the future, there's a potential for you to do that. If you want to continue observing the night sky and observing the universe, you can do all of that. So I think, again, all of the skills that you need to do all of that is problem solving. I mean, yes, you need to be somewhat apt in math and sort of the physical sciences. However, as I just mentioned, there's people that work in policy that could be around space, or you could be a space lawyer. You can, we're looking now like how do we actually do medical procedures in space, agriculture, like we need plants. We need sustenance out in space. It's not like you can just go to Mickey D's on the lunar surface and call it a day. And so I think we are seeing that if you want a job in space, the jobs that are needed and the skills that are needed are quite varied. So I guess I started that with being like very, very narrow. If you want to get into like technical space, you need those technical skills. And then I was like, no, there's all types of jobs. So I guess in order to answer that question properly, I need to understand like where people want to get to, and I could sort of steer them in. But
yeah, that's the cool thing about space industry is basically any job you can put space in front of it and it's a real job. So a broad set of skills to work in the space industry.
Heck yeah, and I guess that's where the Space Discovery Center comes in as well, and there's a spot there for you to understand all the amazing careers that are available to you at the moment. And then also, I remember when I was in year 10 or 11, and I went to an open day at uni, and like we're trying to prepare you for jobs that don't even exist yet. And I was like, whoa! But it's true, like in year 10 or year 11, an influencer wasn't even a thing, right? And so now it is, or like even Australian Space Agency wasn't a thing even when I was in undergrad, and now it is. So I think, just trying to be one step ahead too. Like if you really want to find a niche, think about where the sort of next big thing is, whether it might be cyber or AI or quantum computing. I mean, those are the three big things at the moment. And there's a lot of human aspects to a lot of that, especially with around AI and the ethics around it.
On that point, what do you think the space industry might look like in 10 years' time?
Oh, that's a hard one to answer. That's a really, really hard one to answer. I guess it really depends upon what are the overarching goals that the space sector is trying to solve. I mean, right now we're trying to launch things off Australian soil, which is really exciting, both over in Port Lincoln and then up in Arnhem Land as well. And so in the next 10 years, we can see that. I think hopefully a couple of the problems in terms of space junk might be resolved as well, because satellites are being put up in such an alarming rate now. It's like, well, how do we sustainably put these things up and then bring them back down again? And the access to space now is becoming smaller and smaller. Oh, sorry, I should say larger and larger now. And so that's another big thing in the next 10 years. But I mean, there's missions that are already in the pipeline, whether it's for exoplanets or whether it's um, for galactic studies, or I guess, yeah, it depends also on, like, space is such a broad term as well. You could be talking about like space science or like observing on the ground, or you could be talking about um, observing the moons of Jupiter, which there's a new satellite called JUICE, which is just about to be launched. That's going to go to Enceladus, which is really, really cool. Sorry, Europa. And yeah, I think that's all. There's so many cool and exciting things that are currently happening. But in terms of where it's going to go to, I'm not sure, but I'm super hopeful. I'm super hopeful, and I'm super excited of where it's heading.
Awesome. I've got a comment from an audience member. Thank you for your time, Dr. Jake. Keep up the great work that you're doing for Questacon and for exoplanetary science. If any other audience members want to put in a final question for Jake, pop them in now and we'll get it to pass it over to Jake. Yeah, thank you so much for your time and joining for this interview.
No worries.
Is there any final comments that you'd like to add?
Great question. Great question. I think that there are always opportunities in STEM in general, or whether it's getting in the space industry. And I think it's just a matter of just seeing what's out there, whether you go onto the ASTC website, or you go on Questcon's website or other organizations and see what they're doing. And I think what's great about the science, or the space industry and science communication industry, is that most people are pretty open to have a chat about what they do. And if you want to know more, people are so willing to sit down and say, hey, look, I've got like 15 minutes, half an hour to sit down and talk to you about like my journey and where I've come from, and be able to be able to share some wisdom with what they're doing and how they've gotten to where they are now. So I think, yeah, just reach out. And I think most of us think that opportunities might come to us, but I think being proactive on that front and going out and chasing these opportunities, one, shows that you're keen and you're wanting to be engaged in that space, and then two, people are more than happy to have those yarns. So yeah, just get out there, and if you want to get involved, there's no reason why you can't. And if you can't, if you've got barriers in front of you, let me know and I'll smash them down with you.
Awesome advice. We've got one final question from the audience. What is your opinion on how Australia could contribute best to space research?
It's a great question. I think we're already doing a fantastic job. I think we punch well above our weight here in Australia. You only have to look at over in Western Australia, where that is the hub of, say, astronomy in Australia, and I would say the hub of astronomy in the Southern Hemisphere. You have the Square Kilometre Array, which is going to kick some absolute huge goals, and ASCAP. You also have, where I did my PhD at the University of Southern Queensland, there was only a handful of us that were doing our PhDs there, and now you have the likes of students that did their undergrad at Harvard now going to USQ to do their PhD.
Awesome.
Which is absolutely unreal. And whether it's in astronomy or whether it's in space, I think the Space Agency has been laying some incredible and important groundwork, both in terms of industry and then also trying to funnel people into space. And I think it's just a matter of continuing that support and looking towards our bigger siblings, whether it's ESA or NASA, for some assistance. But I think what's been great within the community is that everyone wants to lift each other up, and Australia's no exception to that. So I think, yeah, again, I think we punch well and truly above our weight, and I'm actually really, really excited to see what the future holds as we move forwards.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Jake, and your openness and your advice for us all. Yeah, this is all the time we have today. If anyone would like to learn more about the space industry, how to become a space expert, come on into the Australian Space Discovery Centre or visit Questacon. Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, everyone.